Hello there, this is James S. Crafty, J1978, and before I continue the analysis of the Spirit Science channel, in his comment on part 3 of this video series, my good friend Gargamel Gold pointed out that many of the beliefs which I discuss in these videos are not actually unfalsifiable in the strictest sense of the term, and technically speaking, he is correct. However, as I pointed out in my reply to his comment, I would argue that this is largely an issue of semantics, because while I completely agree that many of the claims themselves are falsifiable, the entire raison d'etre of this video series is that the beliefs which cause people to make such claims can never be proven to be false, because no matter what evidence may be presented, believers can always simply claim that science is too limited, that it is deliberately hiding the truth, and that the actual truth is beyond our current level of understanding. Indeed, how many times as rationalists, skeptics and so forth have we cornered a creationist, an Islamophobe, an MRA, an anti-statist, an anti-vaxxer, an anti-sex work activist or anyone else for that matter with incontrovertible evidence which completely blows their claims out of the water and utterly destroys their arguments, only for them to reshape and repackage their core belief in a new form and present it again. This is the point of Jordan's "I could be wrong" and "it's just an idea" caveats in many of his later videos. The fact that beyond his pathetic attempts to avoid any conflict with the people and the evidence which repeatedly prove him wrong, saying "it's just an idea" indicates the fact that no matter how utterly we may disprove, dismantle and destroy a particular claim, he can simply make up another one, and another, and another, and another, because he believes, and the people who support him will continue to do so, because they believe as well. At the end of the day, in fact, whether or not a claim or even a belief is subject to scientific scrutiny is irrelevant to the point of this series, because although it's been more than a decade since I last studied psychology, this is an exploration and analysis of the psychology of belief, of the tribalistic us versus them division based on subconscious needs and fears, which causes people to become more fanatical in the face of evidence to the contrary, rather than putting aside their unfalsifiable beliefs. As always then, the relevant links are also down at the underbar, and I ask everyone to please read the comments for themselves. But moving straight along though, regardless of whether or not we can actually formulate a hypothesis by which to test the assertions, Lesson 10 on the Spirit Science channel is simply the same old song, asserting that the fact things look similar proves that all life, the universe and everything is somehow connected, and can be understood through the comprehension of a few geometric shapes. Oh, and also that NASA is deliberately hiding the truth about the so-called face on Mars. In part 1 of Lesson 11, Evolution, which, ironically enough, hardly even mentions biological evolution at all, having once again confirmed that the only source for everything he's saying is Drunvalo Melchizedek, who wants to bet that his real name is something really generic like Bob Smith, a man who claims to have learned all of the ancient knowledge of the universe through channeling an ascended master named Thoth, former priest-king of Atlantis. Jordan says, quote, "There is always a reason for everything in spiritual geometry. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens without a reason. Everything is connected." To us, of course, ironically enough, this will sound completely meaningless and absurd, but on the emotional and subconscious level on which the need to believe exists, when people are desperate to understand why, having been dazzled with a load of jargon which sounds really impressive if you have no idea what Jordan is actually talking about, if they're in the right mindset, then the promise that nothing is ever random or meaningless, that everything can be explained, is the main reason why people will believe. After this, Jordan once again states directly that science has been hiding the truth from us, after implying that religion has been doing so as well, describing evolution and creationism as flip sides of the same coin, because neither of them can explain shifts in human consciousness, which, by the way, don't happen, relying upon the fact that science doesn't tackle the question of why DNA mutates as the only basis for his absurd claim that we are, quote, about to become super beings. As always then, the promise that nothing is random or meaningless and that believers will have everything they desire is enough to lead countless people to believe in defiance of all evidence to the contrary, in spite of the fact that these claims have no evidence to support them beyond a few grossly disingenuous and ignorant appeals to the facts and science which they reject and condemn. And in part 2 of the lesson, Jordan once again plays upon the essential human need for community, acceptance and love. Because, as I explained in my Indoctrination video linked below, offer people this, and even if it's a total lie, the fear and hatred of anything which is claimed to be a threat will take root and grow by itself. In Lesson 12, the so-called human history movie is in reality a story, an allegory which was allegedly passed on to Drunvalo Melchizedek through his channelings and what have you with Thoth, telling the tale of how everything on Earth was hunky-dory until, having destroyed their own planet, the Martians, representing the male, left-brained modern world with its destructive and deharmonizing science and technology, came to Earth and messed everything up, and how even to this very day the Illuminati, the 1%, or whatever we may choose to call them, are descendants of these Martians, how politics and religion have each conspired for thousands of years to keep us ignorant and exploited. But don't worry, my friends, because there is still hope, and we can all still achieve Christ consciousness. As I say then, it's an allegory whose message and moral could not possibly be more obvious, because at the end of the day, the point of all such unfalsifiable beliefs is that they only have one point, specifically that they, the other group which they despise and condemn, are the cause of the problem and all evil in the world, meaning that if only they didn't exist and everyone agreed with us, then everything would be sunshine, lollipops and rainbows. But literally though, Jordan is passing on a story which Drunvalo Melchizedek claims was told to him by, for lack of a less insulting term, a voice in his head, meaning that the only possible reason to believe any of it, along with anything that he says about sacred geometry, is that it satisfies the 4 premises which I described in part 1 that are the basis of such unfalsifiable beliefs. After this, the message of Lesson 13 is buy crystals, because they might change your life, but only if you sincerely believe that they will. Jordan admits that their effect is entirely psychosomatic, no different from a child believing that the rock he picked up is magical and will help him to become a great baseball player. And seriously, by this point, Jordan isn't even attempting to give any reasons why we should believe a single word he's saying, assuming correctly that you've already bought everything that he's selling, because after watching the so-called history movie especially, by this point, either you believe what he says, or you do not. Likewise, the message of Lesson 14 is buy this book, and as someone who once studied psychology, Lesson 15 is probably the most insulting thing that I've seen since Jordan first introduced his audience to the whole left-brain, right-brain fallacy in Lesson 4, because just as he did in his earlier lessons, he twists just enough facts, evidence, and common-sense conclusions to make Drunvalo Melchizedek's insane live-from-the-heart rubbish sound believable to anyone who's already swallowed everything he's spouted thus far, drawing a clear distinction between the brain, male, and the heart, female, literally asserting that the biggest problem with the world today is that we think and perceive the world around us using our brains, not our hearts, meaning that, as before, either you are so emotionally biased against science, technology, and the modern world, and so desperate for everyone to join hands and sing Kumbaya that you literally believe anything which tells you what you want to hear, or you do not. After this, Lesson 16 is by far the most tribalistic video on the Spirit Science channel that we have seen at this point, listing the 3 possibilities which are assumed to be the ultimate result in any such unfalsifiable belief. Either A, everyone in the world will join us, agree with us, and we will all live in the magical utopia which rejecting the other group will bring forth. B, everything will continue the way that it is going now, with the other group dragging everything further and further down until the planet is eventually destroyed. However, just as Jordan claims that there are too many beings of light in the world who are awake right now for that to happen, all such unfalsifiable beliefs are built upon the premise that the believers will draw a line in the sand and stand tall against the other, meaning that C, the believers will have their utopia and their reward. For some Christians, the rapture; in New Age beliefs, ascension; for Islamophobes, their Muslim-free community existing as an island in the midst of Sharia and jihad; and for anarcho-capitalist objectivist types, Galt's Gulch, rapture or what have you, leaving the rest of humanity to suffer, burn and die. Of course, Jordan carefully avoided actually stating that last part directly in his video, because Spirit Science is supposed to be all about love and unity. However, ask Martimer81 how much love and acceptance he receives from Spirit Science fanboys on a daily basis. Once again, the link to his channel is listed down as the underbar, and I ask everyone to please subscribe to him if they haven't already done so. And the reality is that just as with every other such unfalsifiable belief, no matter what may be preached, for every one person who is genuinely eager to save others from hell, feminism, Islam, multiculturalism, pornography, sex work, or anything else for that matter, by converting them and opening their eyes to the truth, another 100 take enormous satisfaction from the knowledge that they will eventually be proven to be right, and that everyone who scoffed and ridiculed them will be left behind as they sit back and laugh. Honestly, my friends, what could possibly be more delicious for the emotionally insecure people who have spent their entire lives looking for acceptance, community, and purpose than to find it by joining the group which is right, knows the truth and the secrets which are being withheld from the people, believing in defiance of all evidence to the contrary, as the divisions between the true believers and the rest of the world become deeper, and then laughing as they say, "I told you so," meaning that once again, no matter how much it may claim to reject tribalism, that is the basis of all such unfalsifiable beliefs. Next, Lesson 17 returns to sacred geometry, declaring that all of reality is the result of consciousness and geometric shapes, offering the same promise that believers will understand themselves, the world around them, and the universe as a whole, partly by playing a game which is available now from their friend David's website. And after that, Lesson 18 introduces us to the work, in inverted commas, of Nassim Haramein, claims that art is the expression of energy, and tries to persuade us to buy art from their own website. It's a living, I suppose. Lesson 19 once again tries to drive home the assertion that everything is connected, even declaring that if two things aren't connected, then we can make connections between them. Because yes, just as in any other unfalsifiable belief, you can twist anything to be anything and say anything that you want it to say and be. So although I realise that I sound like a broken record playing a recording of a trained parrot by this point, the only question is how desperate you are on an emotional and subconscious level for even the illusion that everything in your life will somehow finally have true meaning and make sense. Just as a brief side note though, the mastery which Jordan had demonstrated as a propagandist in Lesson 4 appeared to be absent in Lesson 19 when he made a clumsy and deeply offensive appeal to emotion based upon his disingenuous misinformation regarding the polar opposites of fusion and fission, restating the same bigoted assertion that science is evil and destructive, meaning that either you're with us or you're against us, once again based upon the ridiculously ironic premise that drawing divisions between things causes disharmony and destruction, while making exactly the same distinction himself. However, as I've now stated repeatedly, by this point on the Spirit Science channel, either you believe everything he says, or you don't, and knowing that believers will ignore the hypocrisy, for Jordan, subtlety has long since become obsolete. Moving on to lesson 20, water. As I explained in part 1 of this video series, and Jordan has discussed himself in his earlier videos, one of the main reasons why people are so determined to feel as if they understand life, the universe and everything is the fundamental human need to have agency and control, to know that we are significant and have an effect on the world around us. As a matter of fact, the lowest common denominator in all of the unfalsifiable beliefs which I am analysing in this series is this fundamental human need for agency and control, to believe, regardless of the evidence, that we can be happy no matter what occurs and that we can save the world. After all, the fundamental basis of all tribalism is the fear that the other is taking this control away from us. So in this video specifically, from encouraging us to make spirit water to calling for everyone to meditate to help heal the planet's water supply, which is supposedly being damaged by technology and bad vibes. Whether it's true or not, Jordan is allowing people to believe that their actions have meaning and consequence, that their own actions can actually heal themselves and the world around them. Of course, there is also the false claim made earlier in the video that modern science knows very little about water, thus reasserting the entire premise of the channel that only by understanding the spiritual side of everything can we actually understand reality, that as it exists at the moment, science is like four blind men feeling an elephant and believing that it's a snake, a flag, a rope and a tree trunk, when the real answer lies in unity. But as Martin explained in his own rebuttal of this video, also linked down as the underbar, like so much of what Jordan says on his channel, this misrepresentation is disingenuous at best and actually propaganda at worst. In Lesson 21, introducing the toroidal field is simply another excuse to go over the same talking points for the 21st time in a row. The world is bad because we think too much and feel too little. All life is connected. The universe is built on love. Science alone can never fully understand anything. We can cure cancer and do anything else we may wish, but only as long as we genuinely believe. They are conspiring to keep the truth from us and to exploit us at every possible turn, and if only the bad things were gone from our lives, then everything would be happy and wonderful. Whether we're talking about every Rocking Mr. E video ever made, every Pat Condell video ever made, every John the Other video ever made, every Once Forgiven Now Free video ever made, every Bionic Dance video ever made, or any other example of anyone who is propagating an unfalsifiable belief, it always comes back down to repetition of the same core principles, to making the exact same talking points over and over, and finding new and ever more ingenious ways of saying exactly the same thing. As a matter of fact, if you've made it this far, then kudos for sticking with the entire video series, and although at the time I'm recording this, there are still 10 videos left on the Spirit Science channel to be analysed, and I have actually watched them all twice, I've already answered the question of why people believe as thoroughly as I possibly can, and although the details of what and how may vary depending on the circumstances, the why of belief is always fundamentally the same. So the next time you are dealing with someone who does hold an unfalsifiable belief, then I hope that what I've explained here will help you to understand them a little better, to understand that evidence is insignificant when compared to the emotional and psychological benefits of belief. Indeed, I hope that if nothing else, we atheists, rationalists, skeptics, or whatever we may choose to call ourselves, will finally stop insisting that the lack of evidence for a god or God's existence is the reason why we don't believe, demanding that theists provide us with such evidence, because on the contrary, it is the lack of a reason to believe, the lack of any emotional or psychological need, which is the overriding factor, meaning that, as I have stated in several of my old videos, even if it was proven conclusively that Yahweh does exist, I still would not believe in him. To quote Daniel Jackson in one episode of Stargate SG-1, whether or not God really exists is not as important as whether or not the belief in God really exists. Once again demonstrating how we as atheists, rationalists, skeptics, or whatever we may choose to call ourselves, completely fail to comprehend the entire nature of faith and belief. But either way though, regardless of what anyone else may believe or disbelieve, I now have the answers that I sought when I first began making this series. I've explained everything as well as I possibly can, and at long last I can get on with my life.